Let me find an old kit to build in my stash. You know, one that's been here for far too long. Ah! Here's one. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/48 scale German Nashorn tank destroyer. Now the model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I frequently mention in these videos, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. Now this model here is built predominantly out of the box, but we'll be going over the model's features as well as a few of the areas to watch out for on this build in this video. So stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of information coming at you. Before we continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle is the Sdkfz 164 Nashorn tank destroyer. The Nashorn was a German-designed tank destroyer that was developed and did see action during World War II. The origin of this vehicle was after the Germans' experience with dealing with the T-34 on the Eastern Front. When the T-34 was first encountered by the Germans, they had a hard time with knocking out this new design Russian vehicle. The one weapon that the Germans did have that was able to penetrate the T-34 was the 88mm gun. So it was thought up by the German High Command to field a mobile gun system that had the 88mm gun in use for its main armament. The company Alcat took these requirements and built a vehicle based upon it. Their vehicle was an open-topped, open fighting compartment, fully tracked vehicle based on the Panzer IV and the Panzer III drivetrain. For the main armament, the vehicle utilized the 88mm PaK 43/1 gun. This artillery piece was more than adequate at dealing with the armor thicknesses of the Russian-made vehicles. The vehicle was powered by a Maybach 11.9 liter V12 gasoline engine, and the vehicle had an operational range of about 235 kilometers or roughly 146 miles. The maximum speed was 42 kilometers an hour, and which roughly again translates to a little over 26 miles an hour. When the new vehicle was first proposed, it had the designation of Hornisse, which is the German word for hornet. Shortly after the vehicle's adoption, however, some alterations were made to the original platform, and to distinguish between the two vehicles, the vehicle was renamed the Nashorn, which is the German word for rhinoceros. Now, just like with many of the other Panzerjägers of the period, the Nashorn utilized an open fighting compartment design. The vehicle did have armor protection, however, it was on the thinner end. This vehicle was really more or less designed to be a sniper type platform where the vehicle would engage enemy targets at ranges that would be far exceeding the range of the weapons found on those threat vehicles. Because of that, the armor protection was deemed not to be as important for a vehicle with this configuration type. With the open top configuration, this did give plenty of visibility for the crew and the tank commander in order for him to quickly see targets and engage them with minimum effort. In total, about 473 units were completed, and in actual combat, these vehicles were very effective. With the type of armament, they were more than capable of not just dealing with the Russian tanks of the period, but also the tanks fielded by the Americans and the British. Another benefit of the Nashorn's design was the idea of recycling the suspension and the running gear components from the Panzer IV family. Because these components were in full production, there was a large stockpile of spare parts on hand, which was great for keeping these vehicles in operation for longer periods of time. Also, by utilizing stock off-the-shelf components, there was no need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and come up with specific type parts which would then use up more resources and would cut into the other production lines of the other German tanks of this period. From here, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this vintage 1/48 scale Bandai Nashorn tank destroyer. Now, for anyone who's a fan of the channel, you'll recall that I recently completed a model showcase video for a 1/48 scale Hetzer from the same manufacturer. In that video, I described that back in the 1970s, Bandai released a quite expansive range of 1/48 scale military vehicle kits. This Nashorn here is one of the kits that were in that lineup. Now, unlike that Hetzer build, which was a original 1970s release of that kit, this one here was released several decades later. Just like I, again, mentioned in that video, 1/48 scale is one of those scales that go in and out of vogue every so often. Well, after the 1970s period, Bandai stopped production of these 1/48 scale kits, and after a couple decades, they actually reintroduced the line in the 1990s. And that is where this kit comes from. Along with this kit here, Bandai also released several other of their 1/48 scale kits as well. These kits, although now have been out of production for quite some time, were quite common to find during that time frame and are possibly something that you could find today found on some online retailer of sorts. Now, outside of a few small changes to the box art itself, inside the box, the kit is basically the exact same way it was released back in the 70s, with the exception of one or two differences, which I'll go over once I crack the box open. Now, this model here is actually one of those kits that I purchased a number of years ago. Specifically, I bought it back in 2003 from an online retailer up in Canada, of all places, which is no longer in business anymore, sadly. Now, the kit has been sitting in the stash for a number of years, like I said, and that is quite evident with the amount of dust which you can see on the surface. Get all this crap off. Now that the box art has basically been wiped clear, you can see the graphic design. Now, the box art itself is the same illustration that was used on the original Bandai kits from the 1970s. And you can see it has all the 1970s goodness to it in terms of the quality of the illustration. Same is also true for the font and the rest of the typography found on the box. And also carried over is the red stripe, if we recall from the other video. However, it's slightly different. In the earlier box art renditions, there would have been an eagle with a German fancy X found on this corner over here. That would have been on the original releases, and then that too would have changed slightly during production runs, but on the 1990s version that is not present, and it's just the white stripe with the Bandai logo. Also, another difference and change that Bandai did was that the original kits were produced in Japan. In the 1990s, they went ahead and switched production to China, and you can see that here with the little sticker added to the box. Carry on with the rest of the graphic design. Here we have the side tabs. This kit, of course, is number 6 in its series, and like I said, Bandai released a wide range of these kits in 1/48. And just like with the Tamiya kits of the period, they have a little side panel here with the other kits that are available. On this side here, we have the addition of a barcode. Obviously, that wasn't found on the earlier releases, but this little side panel here with this information written in Japanese is. Okay, cracking open the box. Reveal the kit's contents. Now, unlike the Hetzer where it had that cool little infographic found on the inside, that's not going to be found on the 1990s releases of these kits. However, that's not really important, as what is important is the actual kit contents themselves. And like I said before, inside here, all these parts are direct re-releases of the original tooling from the 70s. For better or for worse, which I'll go over in a second. Starting with this runner here, we have a bunch of figures. It's molded in this green plastic. Not really going to go over too much as it's not really that important for this video, but what the hell, I have mine exactly here, might as well review that. Okay. And there you get to see the quality of the molding. Obviously, compared to what people are used to today. This kit in general is going to be a lot softer in the quality of details compared to some of the more super kits out there on the market, but from the 1970s time frame, these sets here are pretty standard. We obviously have here the tank commander and 2 other crewmen. A very crudely rendered 98K Mauser. A little bit of flash on this one here. And this appears to be an antenna, which is interesting that they actually give that to you. From there, this now takes us to the actual kit itself. Now, everything you see here is factory sealed. This kit has been untouched since I purchased it all those years ago. So it is a true unboxing. Now here goes the hull. You'll notice it has a lot of the details molded in, like the tow cables here. This is something that was quite common on the kits of this period and era. I'm on the fence if whether or not I'll probably keep that or not. Chances are I might delete it, but we'll see once the build progresses. Note the detailing found on the fender work. We have little X's rendered for the diamond plate. And there is also some detailing found here on the crew fighting compartment. Being an open-top vehicle, this area is going to have some interior detailing to it. Now, on that subject, just like with the Hetzer video, if we can recall, one interesting feature that these old Bandai 148 scale kits had was that in addition to the exterior detailing, every kit in their lineup had interior detailing as well. Now, the interior detailing is going to be very primitive, but it is interior detailing nonetheless. Here goes the hull. Now I'm curious if this is just the Panzer IV hull or if they actually made the hull for the Nashorn. As we can recall, the Nashorn hull is actually longer than the one from the standard Panzer IV. And you can see this here obviously is the 90s release. Made in China. The original would have had, of course, made in Japan. Now, the suspension is integrally molded into this piece here. The suspension detailing is not bad. It does have some overall detailing to it. However, again, compared to what people are accustomed to with modern tooling, it is going to be a little bit on the more dated end. However, overall, these do build nicely, in my opinion. Just some rough fitting together right now, and you can see that the hulls do line up pretty well, and this is just the standard Panzer IV hull, and with the back section here, obviously you glue a chunk onto it, which gives you the missing area, which is required for the Nashorn. And a Hummel too, but I'm not sure if they even made a Hummel. I don't know. We'll see as I progress, I guess. Moving from the hull now takes us to this runner here, which is, of course, the running gear. Now, the running gear is pretty good, even for, again, the old tooling. In fact, it's for the scale that this is, in 148 scale, it looks to me to be on par with some of the more current contemporary 148 scale kits of today. Here we have the return rollers. Not too bad. And going down further, you can see some of the interior detailing now starting to take scope. Here we have the engine, as well as the front transmission. Interesting enough, it says this is for a Panzer III, or anti-tank gun, self-propelled gun, Panzer III or Panzer IV, which is interesting because obviously no Panzer III gets these wheels here. Anyway, moving on to the last runner bag. Okay. Well, here we have some more odds and ends. Sprocket, rear idlers, as well as the other interior fittings for the fighting compartment. This is, of course, the ammo rack with the shells that are molded in. Pioneer tools, and again, just some more bits and pieces. Spare track rack for the front. Basically everything you need. And on the last runner, this is of course the runner that's specifically for the Nashorn. We have here the hull sides, the rear, and the gun. What's interesting is that even though this kit is as old as it is, the way the fighting compartment layout is designed on the runner is actually very similar to what is seen on later kits, like the Dragon rendition, and I believe even the Tamiya renditions as well, possibly even the AFV Club one, basically mold the Nashorn in a similar format. So if you're used to assembling those kits, this kit here should basically be second nature to you. Here we have those cool intake grills on the side. Here goes the mount for the 88, and the 88 barrel itself, which is a long little bugger. Here's the extender with a separate tow hitch, which is interesting. And on the inside here, we have, again, some basic molding and detailing, some tools, some handles, and other gadgets. Honestly, very similar to the Dragon, the first old school 1993 Dragon release of the Nashorn, which I too did a video of a little while back. And towards the bottom of the box takes us to the Caterpillar tracks. Now, just like all the Bandai kits of the period, they were the single piece vinyl pattern. Get the camera to zoom in. Now here you get to see the detailing found on these pieces here. Very basic and simplistic, but should be more than enough to equip the vehicle. They do have their interior guide horns, but there's no interior track segment detailing found on these pieces here. And of course, on the very bottom of the box brings us to the instructions. Now, these look to be reprints of the original ones from the 70s. Here we have the little diorama scene, and like what was shown on the Hetzer box, these were common on these older school kits from the 1970s, which was, like I said in that video, a really cool feature to have. And if anyone watched that other video of the Hetzer, which I strongly recommend, by the way, you can see that the layout is basically the same, with the drawn instruction sheets. Now, these were not CAD, of course. These were drawn with a ruler, a slide ruler, and a pencil by a draftsman. So many of these old instructions were. And you even have, of course, little snippets of sample builds to help you along your way. And of course you have pictures of the real unit, which was again standard for these instructions. And what's really cool is that on the back here we have a little diorama guide for assembling structures to improve your diorama settings. Now, what's not present on this kit here that was found on the Hetzer was that the Hetzer actually gave you a small little section of bombed out building wall for you to incorporate in your own 140 SL dioramas. That's not really the case on these ones here, but stuff like this is really cool, and you just don't see these on contemporary kits of today. Going down deeper takes us to a Waterslide decal sheet. Now, this is, in my opinion, probably going to be a very huge improvement compared to the older release. On the earlier Hetzer build, the decals were very problematic. In fact, they were just a complete mess, and I had to redo them almost entirely. On this one here, Bandai looks to have used a more contemporary style of decal waterslide paper, which by all intents and purposes, judging from what I'm seeing here, they look like they'll be able to work on the model, but of course more information on that is to come as the build progresses. But the decal itself, you can see, looks like anything from Dragon or Tamiya. And of course, just your basic set of German AFE markings. Crosses, various number options, and kill rings, as well as unit marks. And on the very bottom of the box, we have here a extra insert about how to assemble tracks and even how to repair them if need be. Tamiya did stuff like this too, but basically it shows you how to melt the two little pegs that hold the two tracks together with a heated nail. And pro tip, a soldering iron works equally as well. And that now brings us to the suspension and the running gear. The Bandai kit does have a pretty decently rendered Panzer IV suspension. Note the leaf springs are present, which is a nice touch, and the leaf springs are actually molded to have their little line segment detailing that is present. On the road wheels themselves, you can see the hub detailing as well as the little spokes that are found on the Panzer IV wheel. All of the fittings that you see here are assembled out of box with no mods necessary. Here we have the sprocket and the rear idler. Now these pieces are actually not glued in place, as when it came time to install the track, I just simply slipped them on, and the track on this model can't actually pivot and rotate. Now obviously I'm not going to be playing with this model, but it is a interesting feature that it does have. However, in my opinion, the stock components do an adequate job in representing the Panzer IV running gear. While on the front here we have a section of spare track. This is all kit supplied. Now, one thing to point out is that when you do assemble the upper and lower hulls, there is going to be a seam found on this section over here, and this was just polished away with some body work. Moving on back brings us to the exhaust manifold. Now, this is one part of this kit which was different compared to the other Nashorn kit that I assembled. Recently, I did another Nashorn from Dragon, only that kit was in 1/35 scale. That vehicle utilized a slightly different design for the rear manifold, where the engine is located in the middle section here of the vehicle, and then there are two exhaust manifolds that run along and on the other build exit on this portion over here. However, you'll notice that on this rendition of the Nashorn, they both emerge from the side of the hull, run along the top sponson here, and then both connect to the standard Panzer IV exhaust tube manifold system. Now, I'm a little hazy, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that this type of exhaust manifold layout is more in tune to what you would see on the Hornisse, which of course was the vehicle that preceded the Nashorn. Which is actually a very interesting aspect that this kit has compared to the other renditions of the Nashorn that have been released in the various scales. Now, if I'm also not mistaken, I believe this might be the only 1/48 scale rendition of this type of vehicle with this exhaust manifold layout, no less. Now, on the kit here, the pieces are all kit supplied and assembled out of the box, but did require a little bit of hand fitting. The tube section here was, of course, a two-piece assembly, which means there is going to be a seam to contend with, and I also drilled out the center exhaust manifold that we have there with a pin vise. This is always a nice tip to do, and it always improves the look of just about any model that you do this technique on. Now, for the side connecting manifolds, they by and large did fit pretty well. There was a slight bit of hand fitting required just to get everything to the way you see it, but nothing really noteworthy to mention in that respect. Moving from the exhaust manifold takes us to the gun cleaning staves. These are molded directly to the rear plate here of the vehicle, and that brings us to the doors. Now, the doors are not integrally molded and can be rendered either in the open or closed state. The handle that you see here is stock with the model, and it's a nice little feature that this kit does have, as opposed to having it just mold solid and you having to drill it out with a pin vise. Interior detailing that is found on these locations are decently rendered, however, are a bit on the simplistic end, as you're going to see that this kit omitted a lot of detailing which would normally be found in this location. Starting with what is present, we have these two boxes found in the rear. We have a diamond plate molded main floorboards. We do have some ammunition racks with the shells integrally molded in. And on the inside portion here, we have some crew equipment like tools, which are actually integrally molded to the armor sides, and a small add-on piece, which would be the fire extinguisher. On the opposite end, we have a small little cabinet, which would be used to hold more accessories, and there are also these grab rails that are found on the top leading edge. Now, what is missing on this kit would be the radio, which is generally found in this section over here in a little cabinet, as well as the other provisions for the seats, which are used by the crew members to operate the gun. There's generally one on either side here. Another bit of detailing which was omitted on the kit is the little piece of armor which would protect the middle section here from any stray rounds which may come across. And there's also a little frame that is used to hold up said piece of armor. Now, the detailing that is supplied with the gun is decently rendered, albeit in a stripped down form. Now, the model can have the gun be able to elevate. However, unlike many of the other larger scale kits, which the gun can also be rendered or can have the feature of limited arc of left and right movement, on this model here, that's not the case. The gun just firmly gets glued into place in the position that you see it here. Now, when it came time for installation of this piece to the model, the kit out of the box has a square and key type format where you have a notch molded into the fighting compartment here and a corresponding piece that's molded on the bottom here of the mount. Unfortunately, on this model here, the fit is very snug on this piece, so much so that if you try to install it out of the box, it's going to have a really hard time in getting into this location here, and it can cause some issues. On this model here, when it came time for the installation, I went ahead and with a file, I removed some of the material on the sides of the bottom portion of the mount, which then opened up the clearance for the piece to then fit in a nice straightforward manner, like the way you see it here. From there brings us to the barrel. Now, the barrel is a two-piece assembly, and on this build here, you will, of course, have a seam to contend with. Now, this is, again, quite standard on most plastic model kits, but on these Bandai kits here, the pieces may be requiring a little bit more hand fitting compared to the other type of seam removal, which is generally seen on other model kits. Again, this is basically a creature from its era. It's not impossible to do. Just with a little bit of sandpaper and some thick super glue, I was able to polish away any seam work that was present on this piece here. This is also true for not just the barrel, but also the mount that we have on the lower portion that we have here. From there, this now brings us to the bow hatch area, and just like with the other 1/48 scale Bandai kits, this kit here does have some interior detailing. Now, the hatches are not glued on and are just basically held on with gravity. With the use of this piece of cardboard or even a X-Acto knife, you could just simply pop them open. Now, the hinges are not functional, so the pieces are just held on, like I said before, in that manner. With the hatches removed, this now gives you the ability to take a peek on the inside. Now, you're definitely not going to be able to get a good look of the interior with the lighting situation that I have here, but I did take several photographs of the interior of the model during its construction, and you should be seeing them on screen now. Now, although the model does give you the engine detailing as well as some basic transmission and crew fitting detailing, most of these Bandai kits, the interior detailing is definitely going to be on the basic end. Now, this is something that can be worked with and enhanced further from its stock original offering, and if you're the type of person that likes to go ahead and tinker around and do some weird scratch building and other kit bashing, perhaps something like this is a good base for you to enhance and play with further. For this build, however, I just went with the stock out of the box offering. Now, this type of detailing is present again on all of the 1/48 scale Bandai kits, and with the type of quality that you've seen here is generally what you're going to expect. However, keep in mind that back in the 1970s, something like this was considered to be very highly detailed and was definitely something that was ahead of its time. With the hatches back on, here we see the remainder of the exterior detailing. On this side here we have a jack, the Bosch light. On the opposite side, we have a storage box, an antenna base, and a spare tire, not to mention another Bosch light. Now, on the antenna base, it's a lot better rendered compared to the rendition found on the Hetzer build that I recently completed. On this one here, there's a little cone, which for this scale, and specific for this age of tooling, does do a good job with rendering the rubber antenna base found on these German tanks, and just like with all of my German builds, the antenna itself is just a piece of wire that's painted black, and on the bottom portion here you can see a little swipe of brass or gold paint, which would be found on the real German antennas, as this little piece would be a brass tube that the antenna actually plugs into. And here you can see the diamond plate found on the fenders. Also on the sides here we have the engine intakes, and note they are nicely rendered. And that brings us finally to the front, where we have a section here of tow cable. Now the tow cable that you see here is actually integrally molded to the top deck of this model, and on something like this you really have two options. You can either delete and amputate the molded in detailing, which then you do a little bit of body work, replicate the little clasp that we have here that would be the tie downs for the cable, or you can just simply paint it and weather it onto the model. Now each has its own benefit and issue with that. When it comes time for removal, this will add a considerable amount of work to the build, in that you have to be very careful with the removal process, and then it does add a layer of body work that needs to be done, and this can slow down your build. If you keep it like I did over here, again, this is doable, but you have to be extremely careful with the paint work, because you can easily mispaint the piece or add slightly too much paint on this object, and then the paint runs the risk of running on you on your finish. So one way, you have to be careful with the body work and the removal, and the other way, you have to be careful with the paint work. It's a type of situation where you have to pick your poison. Either way should be a suffice solution for your build. And for this build over here, again, I just went with the stock route. Now, from there, this takes us to the front where we have the travel lock. Now, what's unique is that even on a model of the scale from this era, the travel lock is fully functional. It just hinges out of the way. You can then elevate the gun, and then the unit just collapses in its state that we have here. It's a very nice touch that the Bandai kit gives you, and the way you see it is totally stock with the model. Only thing I want to point out is that these fittings here are a bit on the frail side, so you do have to exhibit some care and caution when it comes time for removing them off of the sprue, as well as getting everything fitted in place. But with a little bit of caution, you can easily achieve the same effect that I've done here. And this now brings us to the paint and the markings. Now for the model's camouflage scheme, I went with a 3-tone German camouflage pattern, and I went with basically the wide ribbon or blotch type layout, which is pretty standard and would be fairly common on vehicles of this type. Now the markings on this model are the kit supplied Waterslide decals. Now I did talk about, or I should say touch upon this earlier on in this video when I was going over the basic kit features. Now all of the Bandai 148 kits did supply you with a set of Waterslide decals, and these decals contain the numbers, the insignias, the unit division markings, and even the kill rings that are present on these type of model kits. Now, from my experience with dealing with the older Bandai kits, is that the decal quality just weren't the best. If the decals first just hold up, keep in mind they are, aging pretty rapidly, and if they make contact with water, a lot of times these older pattern decals just snap out of existence. But the ones that don't, when they get applied, are just not the best. They are really shiny, they're really thick, they tend to peel on their corners. They're just not the best. To the point where just avoid them at all costs. Now, one thing that has definitely improved a lot since the 1970s are the quality of Waterslide decals. And this model here, fortunately, does have an upgraded set. Now, visually, the decal sets are exactly the same. The difference, though, is just with their overall quality. The decals that are supplied with this model here are made with much better tooling, and they are on par with the other kits of the period, like from Dragon or Tamiya. Now, even though this kit is, at the time of filming this video, a vintage dated kit, keep in mind, these kits have been out of production since the mid-1990s. The decal quality, however, it's up to par with the type of quality that one would expect of today. These decals went on without any problems, and they lacquered on even easier. They were a completely problem-free endeavor. I enjoyed these markings so much that luckily the Bandai kit does give you quite a few extra spares of different type of numbers and other unit markings, and which is good because I'm going to be recycling these decals on other 148 scale models that I do have in the stash. But more information on that, of course, is to come further down the road. In the end, I'm really satisfied in how this build turned out. It's always a fantastic feeling taking a kit that's been sitting in your stash for a number of years, and in this case more than that, and cracking it open and finally getting it completed. There's just some closure to that aspect. On top of that, the build, it makes for a really nice addition to my collection. These Bandai kits are a bit on the dated side, but they still build and polish well into nice representations of the vehicles that they represent. And this now springboards us into skill level and recommendation. Now, because of the model's interior detailing, as well as just with the way the other parts of this build go together, and in some areas some of the hand fitting that's required, I can't really recommend this kit to a beginner. This here is more or less an intermediate to advanced range kit. This kit here is best done by the type of person who's already done a number of kits already, and has a good concept with working with such procedures like seam removal, small part sub-assemblies, and specifically when it comes for large plate alignment. This is true for the Nashorn, but as well as kits like on the Hummel, where trying to get that rear fighting compartment superstructure assembled is one that does take a little bit of hand fitting and a little finesse in pulling off. If you're just diving into plastic kits for the first time, this may lead to some issues and possibly, again, it's not a really good choice for a beginner builder. On the flip side, if you're the type of person who's done a ton of kit builds in the past and also likes to kit bash and scratch build further from what the kit gives you, these Bandai kits are a really good choice for that. Because of their simplistic nature, this gives you a pretty wide open canvas to really take the stock model and further enhance it past its stock offering. On this Nashorn here, you can further enhance the model by super detailing its interior on both the driver's compartment, as well as also adding a lot of the what's stock missing details on the fighting compartment and gun area as well. Now, granted, all of these details are going to need to be scratch built. So if you're the type of person who generally relies on things like photo etch and resin for your modifications, this here might be a little bit outside of your comfort zone. But if you're the type of person who knows how to work in CAD and has access to a 3D printer, specifically a high-def 3D printer, perhaps one of these kits here could be worth your while. And this now segues us into recommendation, and obviously, first out of the way is anybody who's a fan of collecting World War II German armor. If you're a fan of the German Zoo, the Nashorn is basically one of the must-haves. This model here is also a fantastic candidate for a diorama scene. With it being 1/48 scale, there's a huge background of not just diorama accessories, but also plastic model airplane kits that are on the market, as 1/48 scale is a really popular model airplane scale. With this in mind, you could create a really cool and dynamic diorama setting using this as well as any of the other 1/48 scale tank kits on the market, and in combination with the airplane kits that I just mentioned. This kit here is also recommended for the type of person that I mentioned earlier who likes to roll their sleeves up and dabble around with kit bashing and scratch building. All of these Bandai kits are really good candidates for that type of build as well. Finally, I recommend this kit here for anybody who is an avid fan of building and collecting vintage plastic model kits. Although this particular kit here is a re-release from the 1990s, the tooling, the box art, and basically everything about the kit has been left unchanged since its original release in the 1970s. These Bandai kits in general do make for a very fun and interesting offshoot of collecting in the armor modeling hobby. Now, on that note, these models here are relatively easy to come by. They do tend to pop up quite often on places like eBay, but you also run into them at venues like swap meets, flea markets, model shows, and when found can be seen for a range of prices, from the very inexpensive and affordable to the outlandishly overpriced, as well as anywhere in between. Basically, just do a little homework on your own, and if you do encounter one of these kits for a really good price, it might definitely be something to look into for picking up and adding to your own collection. Who knows? You just might get addicted to them, and next thing you know, you're going to have a whole collection of these 1/48 scale Bandais. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/48 scale German Nashorn tank destroyer. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, be it small scale model showcase videos like this guy over here, or the larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been showcased on this channel in the past. Finally, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Till next time.